Yo, what is up guys? Fer here, and today we're going to be talking about the possible rift or division between the world government and the Marines and how these two sides may actually split up at some point in the story, given as things are getting kind of shaky in the One Piece world, especially with Akainu at the top and his relationship with the Gorosei. We saw that it's not exactly stable as of right now, and this may be a conflict that could grow bigger as things progress in the story to something that could ultimately cause the Marines and the world government to split up. But before we get into this video, like the video and subscribe for more One Piece content. First of all, we have to recognize that the world government is the entity that made up the Navy. Therefore, orders from the world government is absolute, especially if it's coming from a celestial dragon, given as they are the individuals that created the government in the first place. But where the problem lies is with Akainu and the new admirals, except maybe Kizaru, because I don't know what his goals are specifically, and even his unclear justice is still very vague, and we don't exactly know where it stands in comparison to Akainu or Aokiji. But more than likely it's somewhere in between. But when it comes to Kizaru, we got some information about him in one of the Viver cards that recently came out, and it basically says that he's not much of a leader and actually prefers to follow orders. However, he does do things at his own pace. So Kizaru, he's not exactly important to the story when it comes to the overall spectrum of One Piece, as he doesn't have goals like Aokiji, Akainu, or Fujitora, but there might be more to his character that we obviously don't know about yet, though I do feel like Kizaru is extremely underrated in the One Piece fan base. But it's very clear at this point that Akainu and Fujitora have something against the world government, especially when it comes to the Shichibukai system. We know that Akainu isn't exactly on good terms with the system because it was stated that warlords actually have a high degree of authority over the Marines in terms of political power, and this really comes down to the balance of powers. We've seen that the Gorosei will do whatever it takes to maintain the balance, and that's why the warlords are put first over the Marines in some cases. One of the examples being Doflamingo and how he had enough power to change what was said in the newspapers. Now obviously Doflamingo is a special case even within the warlords, given as he does have ties to the Celestial Dragons themselves, but my point still stands. Akainu doesn't like it when pirates have more authority than the justice that he's trying to uphold. And then we have Fujitora's wish for the abolishment of the Shichibukai system, and for him Dressrosa was basically the final nail in the coffin because he had first-hand experience of how Doflamingo treated the people of Dressrosa, and he was also pissed off about how the world government fails to take care of its people, which is part of the reason he blinded himself in the first place. And so with Fujitora, he's doing something that other Marines wouldn't do, even if it makes the world government look bad as a whole. It's very clear that he wants to show the world that the government isn't as perfect as they claim, and his goal is to abolish the Shichibukai system might just be one step to something even bigger. And I also think this idea would also apply to Green Bull. Now we have to remember that Fujitora and Green Bull are individuals that weren't a part of the Marines, but chosen by Akainu and the Gorosei to replace the powers that the Marines had lost. Because in this case, they had lost Aokiji, Garp, and Sengoku had pretty much retired, even though they still hold their positions in the Marines, because Kong wants them to inspire the next generation given their track record in the Navy. And finally we had Akainu's promotion to Fleet Admiral, which left Kizaru being the only admiral at that point in time, and so they needed a lot of power to sort of replace what was lost, which ultimately resulted in the Navy draft. Now what people have to realize here is that Green Bull and Fujitora is only one part of the draft. The draft probably consisted of thousands of new Marines coming into the system, new vice admirals such as individuals like Momosagi and Chanton, and probably a lot more that we haven't seen yet. And given that this is the greatest age of pirates, it only makes sense that this would be an age where the Marines would also be at their strongest, because they have to match up against the incredible amounts of pirates in this generation. And so maybe the Marines have their own version of the supernovas, whereas we have Kobe and Helmeppo being one of these individuals, and other Marines that could rival Kobe, just like how Luffy is a rival to the members of the worst generation. Now it's funny because we actually had a decent filler in between Zou and Whole Cake, whereas we learned about Grunt, who was a Marine that was a subordinate of Aokiji, and he was also training under Garp. Now even though this was filler, it makes perfect sense for the story because parallels is something that's very huge in One Piece. And so in a sense, Garp could be the Zephyr of this era, where he's going to train a lot of individuals of this generation who would later become admirals in the future, Kobe being one of those individuals. And for this generation, it was stated by Jinbei that this is the strongest the Marines have ever been in its entire history. And it makes perfect sense because we know that Akainu is trying to make progress when it comes to the Marines' jurisdiction in the New World, so he's going to need a lot of power to fight against the Yonko. And so going back to the division that could happen between the Marines and the world government, I think Fujitora and Green Bull have something against the system and join the Marines to change that. And this was also a question in an SBS, and I quote, "Is there a chance that the new admirals Green Bull and Fujitora were possibly created with the concept that despite them being people of the Marines, deep down inside they are both admirals who secretly harbor ill feelings towards the world government, going against the world government kind of like pirates, as can be seen with Fujitora's wish to completely abolish the Shichibukai system set up by the world government." Now, typical Oda dodges the question and chose in response. He doesn't answer it, but I feel like this question proves my point even more. The only reason one would want to become an admiral is because that position comes with power, and with power one can make changes. And this is the reason I think Akainu chose these two individuals that have these ideas that line up with his, but not exactly to the same extent. He chose people whose goals may eventually lead to something that could obstruct the entire system that the world government created, and having allies is something that he's going to need if time ever comes to revolt against the world government. And Akainu may be that individual who will eventually cause the rift between the government and the Marines, on top of the fact that Akainu would definitely want the Navy to be self-sufficient, not relying on the warlord system to fill in the balance. An example of this would be his interaction with the Gorosei, as he does have some distaste for the Celestial Dragons themselves. While Akainu is the leader of the Marines, there are people who hold more power than him within the world government, and these people use their power over him in ways that he doesn't like. And this could ultimately cause a rift that would split the Marines and the government into two completely separate groups, and at the center of this plan would be Akainu. And something that's also very special about the world military draft is the individuals that were drafted into the system. Again, key example here is Fujitora. And so you would think to yourself, how many people like Fujitora joined the system? People that more or less have been in the same shoes or experienced something similar to Fujitora before they were drafted. Maybe some of these individuals have seen the injustice of the system and decided to join the Navy to change that. I feel like that is something that Akainu and Fujitora could use if they do rebel against the world government. Now, this is obviously not going to sit well with the Gorosei or the Celestial Dragons. This could result in a battle between the government and the Marines. And this is the only time I think there could be something there when it comes to the fighting capabilities of the Gorosei. We have to remember that these guys are still ranked higher than the Fleet Admiral and the Commander-in-Chief. Sometimes status could also mean power in terms of combat ability. So the Gorosei might prove themselves to be extremely powerful in combat. Plus, it was basically confirmed that the Ball Gorosei wields the highest rank Kitetsu, which is said to be on the same level as Mihawk's Yoru. So that in of itself says something about these guys. It's obvious that these guys are very special in some way, shape, or form. And so just because there might be a struggle of supremacy among pirates doesn't mean there won't be one on the government side of things, especially with Akainu as Fleet Admiral. The Throne Wars could be a lot bigger than we think, and let's not forget about Dragon and the Revolutionaries. We know that Dragon is about to declare war on the world government, and we also know that the Gorosei have started to make a move. And in terms of how the story progresses, this is the reason why I think Akainu is deserving of the Fleet Admiral position more so than Aokiji, even though Akainu is more vicious and the most radical out of any known Marines. We have to realize here that this is an age where pirates are the most rampant, especially after the fact that Roger said that the One Piece does exist, which made things a lot worse. And we're dealing with people like Jack, who goes to places, burns and kills, tortures people. Akainu being the Fleet Admiral at this point in time is kind of a good thing. I could even argue that he's the current legend of the Marines right now. He's going to make the Straw Hats struggle, because that in return would make the end result of them reaching that goal even more satisfying. While people may hate Akainu, his actions later in the story might put him in a different light. And we saw that Sengoku was actually very similar to Akainu during his prime days, as he followed the justice that was similar to Akainu's absolute justice. But obviously, in the current story, we saw that with age, Sengoku is a different person and goes about things differently. The same thing could definitely apply to Akainu later on in the story. But how do you guys feel about the Marines rebelling against the world government? What role do you think the Marines are going to play moving forward? Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe for more One Piece content. Hit the notification bell if you want to get notified for future videos. It is Pharaoh, and I will see you folks later. Peace.